All right, good evening and welcome to the Marin Interfaith Council's Getting to Know Your Neighbor's Faith, Ask Me Anything. And tonight we have Dr. Rahul Sheth from the Jain tradition. So he will talk to us in a little bit, but I want to make a few announcements before that. If you would like to make a donation, you are welcome to do so on our website, marinifc.org. And this, of course, is one of our many Wednesday events. The first Wednesdays of the month, we always have Release into Peace with Annie, which are brief meditations for the end of the day. The second Wednesday of the month, we have our monthly meditation with a different presenter each month. And I believe our presenter next month is Andrew Lee. So please join us for that. And then next month, for Getting to Know Your Neighbor's Faith, we are going to have Linda Lang, who is a Quaker, so comes from the Quaker tradition. So if after Dr. Sheth speaks, you are welcome to put any questions you have into the chat, or if you're here in person, feel free to raise your hand. And then he'll answer them. So before he begins, let me read you a little bit about him. So Dr. Rahul Sheth was brought up in India in a Jain family, and the values of this faith were instilled in him through his family as well as Jain monks. Jainism teaches Ahimsa, nonviolence, towards all forms of life, and proclaims that this is the prime duty of all living beings. As a practitioner, he has tried to adhere to these basic principles throughout his educational and professional journey from India to the United States. Professionally, he holds a Ph.D. in chemical engineering from RPI, which is, again,
Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, and works at BioMarin Pharmaceutical in the Technical Operations Organization. He is excited to share some basic background regarding Jainism and how he follows it in his own small way. So I will turn it over to you.
All right, Lynn, thanks a lot for having me over here. And I want to thank the Interfaith Council for taking on these initiatives and bringing people from all sections of the the communities together and sharing our knowledge, beliefs, and also learning from one another, right? I think learning is such an important part of life that should never end until the day we are alive. And I really thank you for that. And I'll spend a few minutes giving background about Jainism and diving a little bit into some of the beliefs, maybe some of the rituals, some of the important days in our religion, and also maybe a few relevant topics around our local centers in Northern California. So the first thing I would like to start with is just laying a groundwork for the core principles and beliefs of Jainism. And to do that, I need to just build out how the world is viewed from Jainism perspective. So in most traditions, it's believed that the world is made of matter. Even science believes that, we have atoms, molecules everywhere. But also we believe in Jainism and most other religions that there are living beings, life in the world, right? And we call them souls. Like each living being is a soul, right? And Jainism starts off with the same belief. And one of the core guiding principles is it is not a religion where it's a way of life more than anything else. It's a philosophy that leads us to a path of liberation. And that's what it really is in an essence. Now, there are multiple questions that come up, right? What is that path to liberation? What does it believe, right? And how does it lay down that path for people who follow? And so I'll just speak a little bit about that. The first very core belief that Jainism says is every living being, including all of us here, all human beings, all animals, even all microorganisms, only small living beings that we cannot even see by our naked eye. But science also is increasingly proving that there are beings that we cannot see, but they exist, right? All life is considered equal in Jainism. And it is considered equal in the sense that, okay, their current state in the world is human, animal, or a tree, or a plant, or a microorganism, or something of that sort. However, that's their current form, and that's the body that they have currently acquired, right? However, core within that body lies a soul, and each soul is equal according to Jainism. It gives each soul the same place, and there's no differentiation there. That's number one. Number two is that each soul, now that we have established, that at least that they are equal, is capable of achieving liberation. Now, one could say, okay, how can a microorganism achieve liberation, right? No, they cannot do it in their current form, but Jainism also believes in reincarnation. So ultimately, that soul is capable of becoming, higher forms of life, a human being, and then going down the road of achieving liberation. So that's one of the core beliefs in Jainism. And follow up to that is our gods. They are, in the sense of saying, they are souls who have achieved liberation. So in a way, they are our spiritual guides to that path. So yes, we believe, and souls who have, and that soul can be anybody's soul. It doesn't matter if somebody is born in Jainism or they could be born any other place. As long as a soul follows a path and achieves liberation, for me, they are someone who I'll look up to for guidance because I want to reach there. That's so in the sense, we don't believe that God is the creator of this world. We believe that in our sense, gods are souls who have achieved that ultimate being. Freedom is what I would call. And then the question comes up, how does the world operate, right? So in a very similar sense, I think, to what science says, we also believe that the world is self-governed, meaning that there are laws of nature in this world. We can, to relate it to science, you can say physics, right? Laws of physics, etc. Those laws are what govern the world, and they are equally applicable to every being. There is no partiality to how the laws are applicable to one versus the other. And I think it takes a bigger form when you talk about it, like, how are we as beings bound into this world, right? And how does the law apply equally to each? And that's where the concept of karma comes into the picture. Karma is essentially what is the consequence of our actions. And they don't just have to be actions we do physically, they can also be thoughts. Any thought and action, knowingly and even unknowingly, will constantly lead to accumulation of karma, which essentially is very minute particles that we cannot see. That's the belief. And those particles, like, if you do good things, we say you bind good karma, you do bad things, you bind bad karma, right? The way in Jainism, it is essentially every second of every moment we are living, we are constantly binding karma and also expulsing karma, getting them out. And based on the nature of our thoughts or actions, the output you get from those karma is what we consider good or bad. So if you're doing good things, or even if you're thinking, genuinely thinking good things, then good karma will come to you. And it is not, again, as I said, the law applies equally to each being. These karma, they are not living beings, they are particles of this nature. And they don't differentiate between somebody who's rich or poor, or somebody who is, more or less fortunate in their life. At that moment of time, what you think and what you do is going to determine the kind of karma you buy, no matter who you are. And that's where I was saying, the law applies equally to all beings. So I guess I hope that I have built a strong enough foundation of, what some of the core beliefs and principles are. And now I think I just want to move a little bit towards what I said was, okay, the gods who we believe in are liberated souls, and we are looking towards them for spiritual guidance, and they are giving us that guidance. And I want to spend a little more time on what is that guidance, right? Path to liberation. In a very few words, if I were to describe it, the path to liberation essentially is described as a combination of right belief, right knowledge, and right conduct in life. That is what leads to liberation. And now I think a follow-up, and that path, right? We don't know right from the beginning what is right, right? A lot of people can ask what's right, what's wrong, and that gets debated quite a lot, right? And that's why we are looking towards souls who have achieved it to guide us what is right, what is not, so that we can then follow that, right? And so that just lays out that, okay, that's the path to liberation. Now the question is, right, if I were to boil it down even further, what keeps us bound to this world is karma. If you look at a soul, the way it's described as a soul, as a living being, as a conscious, what I am and what we all are is that conscious. When you take away everything else from us, including my current appearance, including my belongings, that house, job, etc., take everything away from me, what's left at the end, that's really who I am. And what binds us to this world is desires to have something that doesn't really belong to me. And as I just said, right, for a conscious, for a soul, what belongs to me is my conscious and myself, right? And I'm not trying to play down the value of a soul. Soul in our religion is believed that it has infinite knowledge, infinite vision. So, however, due to the desires that we have of owning something, of having something, etc., we constantly bind karma. And that is why we have been stuck to this world, or in this world, right? And going through cycles of life and death, and based on good or bad karma in different, good or bad lives, right? Ultimately, you want to achieve liberation. Ultimately, you want to be in a state where everything is out, right? All the karma, and the karma is, as I said, very minute particles that obviously we cannot see. And if you think about science, right? Hundreds of years ago, nobody believed what an atom is, what a molecules are. We could see, okay, I can see this, I can touch this, okay, I can say, okay, it's here. But even human eye can only see, the visible spectrum is 400 to 800 nanometers in wavelength. For people of science, they'll know that there is infinite wavelengths beyond that we cannot see, right? So the bottom line is we cannot see everything with our eyes. And science then proved, okay, there are atoms, there are bigger molecules, there are within atoms, there are protons, neutrons, very, very small. And you can keep going more and more as the resolution increases. And essentially, karma is of very small particles that are constantly binding to us, right? And it's getting rid of them entirely is what's going to get you there. So I hope I haven't overcomplicated the terminology here, but binding karma, I think one of the key reasons why we bind it, as I said, is desires, right? And what our, gods are teaching us is letting go of desire through various actions is going to lead to eventually getting to where we want. And I think a part of all of that is the three, I would say, key ways of achieving that. One is Ahimsa. And as you mentioned a few minutes ago, right? Ahimsa is like one of the most central principles of Jainism, is non-violence towards beings of all categories, all living beings. It doesn't have to be specific beings, right? Every being. And non-violence, not just, and when we say non-violence, it's not just about hurting someone physically, it's also hurting someone by our words, hurting someone by in our thoughts, even without letting them know. All those things, again, what is it doing? It's creating bad aura in our mind and binding us bad karma. So non-violence is one, treating everyone equally, and that's one. Second, non-possessiveness. As I said, right, desire to own something that leads to karma. Well, non-possessiveness is again telling us to lose that desire for material power. There are a lot of things that people desire, right? To lose that power. And it's not just physically not owning something, but also in your own mind, having the mindset to not have a desire towards it. Because as I said, even thinking can lead to binding of karma, right? And the third thing is anekanta. It's called non-absolutism, meaning a truth has infinite perspectives. So being open about knowing that I don't know everything, and constantly searching for multiple perspectives of knowing one thing, that's what this is, anekanta. It's because a lot of times, you see one thing, I see it from here, I'm saying I'm going to say it's straight, but it's very thin. But somebody looking from on another direction, they can say, okay, it's straight, but it's quite the width, it's quite wide, right? My hand. And that's, you can put like 7 or 8 many blind people near an elephant, and they touch it from multiple places and say, okay, it has a tail, it has 2 legs, it has a tusk. But the reality is, elephant is all those things combined. And so that's a third, I would say, core principle here of Jainism. Following these will help you down this road of reaching non-possessiveness and reaching liberation. So with that, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the history of Jainism. First is, so as I said, the belief is, around the world is that this world goes through cycles of destruction and I would say construction, but cycles of good and bad, right? And we believe that in every cycle, Jainism has existed for time immemorial, and in every cycle, liberate souls who achieve liberation, right, through their karma, they will establish the religion, and we call them tirthankara. So in this cycle of the world, we have had 24 tirthankaras, and they came one after the other. Our recent 24th Tirthankara, who existed 2,600 years ago, around 2,600 years ago, is Lord Mahavira. So you'll widely see that Jains, we pray Lord Mahavira a lot. However, we have AI, as I said, 23 other Tirthankaras. Just 250 years before Lord Mahavira, Lord Parshvanatha, he was also there. And the time span between two Tirthankaras, as you go back in time, increases. That's the belief. At least historians have independently acknowledged knowledge about Lord Mahavira and Lord Parshvanatha. So again, those are Tirthankaras. They are also again liberated souls who after achieving in this life, achieving Keval Gnana, we say, like total knowledge, and relieving themselves of all karma that bind them. They established it, but it doesn't mean that they are the only liberated souls. There are hundreds of thousands of other souls who did get liberated under their supervision. And we call them Keval Jnanis. And we also consider them gods. But in the cycle, in each cycle, there are specific souls who end up establishing religion, and those are who we call Tirthankaras. So that's, I would say, and some context I would want to give here is our 22nd Tirthankara, Lord Neminath. He's said to have existed in the same time as Lord Krishna from Hinduism, and they were cousins of each other apparently. So there is some context that we have derived from history and information that we have. So with that, I think I do want to spend a few more minutes talking about some of the core practices and rituals, and maybe the holidays that are in Jainism. In terms, rituals, leaving them on one side, the one thing that every Jain should follow are the core, the principle. They should practice those. Like rituals have their own place, and I'll get to that. But the principles, again, as I said, are right: Ahimsa, aparigraha, and anekant. But you can break those down into more varieties. So as I said, Ahimsa and aparigraha are there. But then another key principle is satya, meaning not lying, telling the truth. That is one more. Asteya, meaning non-stealing. That's another practice that has been given a lot of importance, meaning something that is not yours, not trying to acquire it through means that is not correct, is stealing, right? So not doing that. And then brahmacharya, which is essentially abstinism. And again, if you think about it all from a perspective of desires and desire to possess or desire to have something, all these fall in that category in one way or the other. So ritualistically, even if you're not following something, it is very important that at least in practice, and you can do these things every day in every form of your life, right? You don't have to be in a temple to do these. You can follow these core principles in your day-to-day activities. And that is a very first and important thing to do. In terms of maybe rituals, I would point out two key rituals. One is called Samaik. And Samaik is essentially, you can do it in chunks of 48 minutes. That's the time you sit down and you essentially take a step back from your day-to-day life during that time. And you're supposed to, observe equanimity during that time, meditate and introspect, essentially. Rather than thinking about everything that's going on your day-to-day. The reason and the importance of doing Samaik is essentially, again, calming yourself down, improving the flow of karma into your soul, right? It's a reaction. It's like input is incoming should be much lower than outgoing. So if you're expelling more karma than that you're binding, you will eventually reach that point, right? And so that's what samayik is meant for. It's like just relaxing and introspecting and observing equanimity. That's a very important practice. And the second one that I want to point out is pratikraman. So pratikraman or kraman, in short, if I want to say, it's reverse gear. And it is said that we should do it every day. And what does this mean? It means that a reverse gear means even if we don't intend to do all these, activities that lead to binding of karma, we end up doing that anyway, just by being present, just by walking, just by talking, just knowingly or unknowingly, right? And sometimes we do it knowingly, sometimes we don't. But it is our duty. That's why it said that at the end of the day, and also beginning of the next day, meaning in the morning, twice a day you should do pratikam, meaning try to take a reverse gear, try to ask for forgiveness for all these sins that you may have done knowingly and unknowingly. So those are, I think, the two key practices, I would say, or what do you call it, rituals that as a Jain we are encouraged to follow. In terms of holidays, holy days, or main festivals, so there is a key one which is called Paryushan. It occurs in India. It's the rainy season. It's in August, September, October time frame. That's when it happens. So that's 8 in some sections. It's 10-day festival where essentially all Jains are encouraged to come together and more intensely and more purposefully follow these core principles and practices, and try to stay away from the worldly activities that we are doing. So it's like an 8-day very focused festival where we try to do that. And again, you're doing these samayik pratikaman, you're doing fasting, etc. And essentially you're trying to introspect during that time. Introspect, ask for forgiveness, and try to come up with convictions that, okay, at least I'll try to, if there are areas where you think you can improve, okay, I'll try to do that in a small way, whatever small way I can. I think that's a very important part of the holidays. And this is a final thing I would say around maybe some misconceptions or misunderstandings. I think two key ones that crop up to me are, one is if you have heard Buddhism philosophy, right? It resonates very closely with Jainism philosophy, and that is a fact, and that's true, right? But sometimes it gets misunderstood that Jainism is like an offshoot of Buddhism, but that is not true. They've coexisted around the same time. That's one, and same goes for many people believing that Jainism is an offshoot of Hinduism. That is also not the case. Yes, geographically, they both existed in the Indian subcontinent, but they're not offshoots of one another. And again, I think the third one that I've already pointed out, that our concept of God is not someone who makes the world or who runs the world, but our concept of God is someone who has achieved liberation and are our spiritual teachers to us. So yeah, I hope I've given enough of a background on Jainism to all of you here and anybody on Zoom, and I'll be happy to take any questions from here.
Well, thank you. That was beautiful. Lots of information and very well said. So thank you. For those of you online, if you have any questions or if any come up, please type them into the chat so Scott can read them. I have some that came up for me. Well, one, because I apologized to Rahul earlier and said that I didn't know anything about Jainism. And so I had to Google it today so that I would actually be able to, know a little bit.
Yeah.
And one of all the tenets you mentioned were in there. With the respect for all life, all souls, you're a vegetarian then?
Yes.
Yes. And it even said, one of the things I read said that even root vegetables aren't eaten, because if you eat the root vegetables, then you're yanking out the life within the plant. That was just fascinating to me. But and then there was one other thing. These are kind of comments. Mosquitoes, you don't hit them?
Nope.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, technology.
Well, to be frank, I've seen so many people, not just Jains, and so many people who say, okay, I don't want to hurt an ant, right? Like,
yeah.
And that's just, compassion towards other beings. And we just have objective reasons why we don't do that. But yeah, I mean, it's just part of, again, compassion towards all forms of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and possessions in this, you're living in Marin County where possessions are big. How do you live your life practicing your faith in the midst of all of this? Everyone wants possessions around here, or it feels like,
Yeah, and certainly I'm no different, to be honest. And I think one part that I personally feel is, just because I do something doesn't mean that makes me right, or I believe that that's right. I'm someone who would say, okay, if I know that this is wrong, even though I'm doing it, I'll at least be humble enough to say it is. Now, your question about possession, and not just Marin County, everywhere in the world, it's the case, right? It's like capitalism running behind, more and more. It is very hard, for sure. But I think, and that's where I think the concept of right knowledge and right to, what do you call it, faith, comes in big time, right? If you end up, if you believe that, yes, this is how it is, that these things are fleeting, whatever we are running behind today, tomorrow, for any reason, they may not be with us. And for a fact, once we leave this world, they will not be with us, right? So trying to reduce our desires comes through that conscious thought process and meditating on these ideas. And these are not false ideas, right? These are facts that you are thinking through. They can help us at least reduce the intensity of our desires. And that's what all of this is, right? Reducing intensity of our desires, slowly but surely. And if you look at it objectively, then it becomes easier, if not very easy. At least it becomes easier to, in this crazy world, be slightly aloof and be slightly more composed, saying, okay. And it doesn't take away from working hard in life. Hard work can be done without much desire, because the hard work can give you enjoyment because you're doing the hard work towards a cause. Even in your work, you could be doing hard work because you believe in what you're working on, right? What we get in return is the fruits, right? But I guess that's the best answer I have at this point. It's not easy, for sure. And that's where people who truly reach a point where they believe in their desires, they reduce, and they reach a level of understanding that, okay, this is all temporary, it's not permanent. They become monks. In many religions there are monks, right? And so, but yeah, I think thinking objectively and just taking some time every day to take a step back and be introspection, that can help.
And you mentioned there's a temple, is it, in Milpitas, which is the closest one for you?
Yep.
Do they gather once a week, or?
No, I mean, there are gatherings that happen once a week, but there are also people who go every day, who live close by. They go every day for, because there are statues of our Tirthankaras and our gods in there. So there are many people who go there every day. But yeah, weekly there are gatherings where there are these patshalas, they say, or you can say gatherings where kids, they are taught the culture, they are taught about the teachings of Jainism, and then many other forms of gatherings happen in the temple. But yeah.
And so you'd gather, I mean, do you have teachers in your faith?
Yes, teachers who are not monks, you mean, right?
Right.
Yes, there are many people who, because you can study, there is no limitation to at least studying the teachings of Jainism. So there are many people who have learned it or who are learning it, and they end up teaching others. So yeah, we do have teachers in there.
And they teach not just the children, but the adults as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And many people who also volunteer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you have?
We have many questions.
Okay.
And just one more piece with that.
Mhm.
Are there also sacred scriptures that may be read? If so, what are they?
Yeah. So there are core scriptures that are called agams. So there are 12 of those. Again, I'm not highly knowledgeable about all those things. And then there are scriptures that are derived from those 12 main scriptures based, because those scriptures are very dense, and there, it's a lot is packed into very small statements, right? So then unpacking that and then is another big task. So there are many scriptures that are also derived from those 12 main scriptures, but there are 12. And in terms of access, I think not that there are a lot of some of those scriptures are definitely available even for practitioners, or we say layman's, right, to learn from, but some may not be available for people who are not the ascetics or monks to learn. But at least ideas that are derived from that are widely available in many books, and many scriptures, other scriptures as well.
Well, many questions, and some of them overlap. So I think a basic question that people are having, can you say more about liberation? Defining it, describing it. What are people liberated from? What is the state of liberation? It sounds like let me say what I think I heard, and then ask you to make it much add to.
Yeah.
So souls go through cycles of life, death, rebirth. Yeah. And based on the karma, then are reborn, however that is, with the hope for eventual outcome of escaping that cycle. Yes. Into liberation. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more? Yeah, well, I wish I knew a lot more, but at least from what I've learned and what I've, maybe even thought through on my own, that is correct. Liberation, I think it's very important for us to know that this is not freedom, what we are right now. And again, it's not in a negative way, that we are bound to this world through our current bodies, through our cycles of life and death, right? And escaping that is essentially escaping what's binding us to the world, right? And essentially existing in a form that we are at our very core, which is a soul, right? And a soul is said to have no form, or no, like, it's not something you can touch. it's just a energy, right? And in some way you can imagine it as like an energy that's just, it's life in itself. And what it looks like, it's not essentially, in some cases it's not like, okay, you're going to heaven and there's going to be, you know, only blissful palaces or something you're living in. No, you won't have a body anymore. You will be who you are, is as a soul. And liberated souls, in our scriptures at least, it is said that, you know, there is, if you consider this universe, there is, it has like a shape of a man standing like this with the hands over their hips, and at the top that's the universe that you can travel in, not the universe outside. We also have a concept where beyond a certain point even you cannot travel. So anyway, at the top of that universe, the travelable universe, we call that lok, is where the liberated souls are said to reach and then just stay there for eternity. And a lot of times, I think people, especially someone who, you know, like needs something or the other happening, hey, I want to watch Netflix, I want to watch TV, I'm just, you know, I'm getting bored. It's like someone could say, like, don't you get bored with that? And that's a fair question, but I think it's our perception that's currently missing. It's that bliss is something that it's being your own and not having thoughts or desires. Can sometimes, if people, you know, even experience that for a few minutes, sometimes they can feel, oh wow, this felt so nice. Just imagine having that forever, for eternity. I guess that's, I guess, a very layman way of explaining it, but that's to the extent even I understand it, right? Yeah.
Let me I'll ask a couple
Sure.
of questions.
Yeah.
Related to that. So you talked about how, for instance, people will go to the temple, and the 24 Tirthankaras.
Yeah.
And the people, in the sense that the gods that are called on for the assistance, is it more called on for their example? The question is, it seems like souls who have reached liberation could be very busy because they're helping others achieve liberation.
Yes, so that's a very good point. So our concept of, okay, I'll pray God and God will come and help me, that is not true. That we do not believe in that concept. We are praying God. What we are doing is we are bringing, through learning what their, you know, what state of mind they reached through scriptures and what they have taught. When we pray them, we are in what we are asking. And again, asking means not literally come and give it to me, right? What we are asking is, I want to become like you, right? And that process, you, like, God is not coming down, right? They are in their own blissful state, like why bother them? But in that thought process, you are purifying your own mind if you are doing it the right way. If you're doing it the wrong way, you could be thinking about a lot of things in the world, all the wrong things in the world, and praying God, it's never going to help you. Praying God, because you are thinking about, you're not thinking about it correctly, right? So that process, if you do it correctly, if you purify your mind slowly by praying, your karma will shed, right? It's all a process of shedding bad karma and binding good karma, at least, right? That will lead you further in that path, in journey. So yes, we don't believe that God, you know, liberated souls, they'll come down and do anything. Liberated souls, they have escaped from this cycle, and they have, but in doing so, they have laid down a path for us to follow. And that's why it's a veneration, saying thanks for, you know, showing us the path, but also we hope we can become like you. I mean, that's the true essence of how it should be done.
Are there stories of the histories of the liberated souls of the tongue?
There are, I may not be fully familiar with all the history, but there are many stories of liberated souls that essentially act as a lesson to everyone. When you hear the way they behaved in those situations, you learned something from that. It's not just that, it's not like they were heroes like with superpowers going around, right? So I think each story that's there, there is a lesson within each of those stories, and that's what we need to learn from, the lesson, not just hearing it. But yeah, there are many stories out there in different books, even in scriptures, that one can access if they're interested, for sure.
And another question that popped in my head, and it may seem trite, but is there a hierarchy of reincarnation? When a soul is reincarnated, if you're reincarnating as an ant or as a vegetable or as a human, is there a hierarchy?
Yes. Hierarchy in the sense, so there are, if you broadly categorize living beings through Jainism, there are 5 broad categories. Ekindriya is beings with one sense of touch. And we say like air, water particles, earth particles, even vegetables. They're all living beings with one sense. Then there are beings with 2 senses. The second sense is the sense of taste. And I don't know beings who are part of the second, but I'm sure with science you can easily know that. And there are many examples. And then there are 3 senses. So the highest sense a living being can have is the sense of hearing. That's the hardest to get. Then the next one after that is sense of seeing. Third one is the sense of smell. Fourth one is the sense of taste, and the fifth one is the sense of touch. So the hierarchy is based on karma. It is said that it takes infinitely better good karma to go from even the smallest being as a single sense being to a 2 sense being. So one thing that we are constantly reminded of in our teachings is we are humans. We are the highest in terms of the number of senses you can have. We have reached that highest point, and humans are the only ones said to be capable of achieving liberation as a human. You cannot do it as other beings. So its math is very abstract here. If you just imagine, right? Even if you look at science, I was reading somewhere like number of life forms on Earth that science can detect is 10 to the power 25 or 30 or something. Just imagine probability that one of those life forms becomes a human. It's so low, right? And so essentially, yes, there is a hierarchy based on karma, of course. But the way to look at it is we have reached here. It's, we have all the necessary tools, as you can say, like senses to actually follow the path to get to liberation. So it's in a way saying, okay, becoming humble, becoming grateful to that we have reached here. It's something good. We must have done something good, but at the same time, we must have come across good souls along our journey who showed us the path in one way or the other, right? Yes. So long answer to this one is yes, there is a hierarchy, and it's again based on good and bad karma.
I want to get to 2 other questions we have.
Yeah.
But I did have one other follow-up, which I hope isn't too much, but
No.
How does it work for the lower, for like a root vegetable or an ant?
Yeah.
To accumulate good karma to become a 4 sense being?
So that dives deeper into this, right? It is said that when you are in those states of beings, you don't have sometimes the thoughts or even the knowledge to know what's good, bad. All you're doing is you hoping that nobody cuts you, nobody eats you, or so a lot of beings are actually stuck in this, and what they tumbling, because by life and death you do expel karma, even though you don't know it, right? So these beings for a long time can tumble through these different stages slowly, and then at some point they could come across be in a state where they have some sense of thought and thinking where they are, and that's where they can take off, right? So it's like a very rare opportunity that we have here, essentially, is what's said. Yes.
With two questions I want to make sure we get to from online. Is there a concept of good desire, such as the desire for liberation, desire for great wisdom,
Yes.
for more guidance, desire for forgiveness?
Yes. So the way I would say it, a good desire is something where you are you're not looking to have more than you are. Like a desire for liberation is essentially where you are saying, I don't want to possess anything. None of this is mine, right? So yes, there is something called as a good desire. I don't know if there is a technical term for that in Jainism, but yes, there are good desires. Of course, thinking good for others is also a good desire, right? But it can be a double-edged sword sometimes, because thinking good for, hey, my family member, they achieve great wealth and this and that, but maybe they get there by doing something that shouldn't, that's hurting others inadvertently. So, but thinking desires that are in the direction of reaching that non-possessiveness, those would be, I would say, the good desires, truly the good desires, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Another question. You've spoken about the mind and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Does the heart have a role in human life, or does it, as it does, for example, in the path of Sufism?
And the path of what? Sorry?
Sufism. The person who asked is Sufis.
I see. Okay.
What's the role of the heart?
Yeah, I'll have to say that I'm ignorant. I've never really thought of that. I know that people say I'm thinking from my heart, right? Mind and heart, they are just organs in our body, right? What we are, as I said, is one being. That's the soul, right? These are all different organs that we have achieved through our karma, and they are helping the body operate in a certain way, right? Operate in general, right? The mind helps us think, the heart helps pump blood into the whole body, right? And keep us alive. So I look at it more from the objective perspective, that it's not mind and heart, it's just thoughts. It's just your, thinking. I guess maybe I haven't answered this question exactly the way it was intended, but I see more at these as a, objectively as organs of our body, but that's not who we are in reality.
Another
Go ahead.
question. So you talked a little about teachings that happen at the temple where people come.
Yeah.
Are there services? And if so, what happens at a service?
Can you elaborate services by service? What do you mean?
Maybe like a comparable Christian service has a ritual that happens every Sunday.
Communal rituals.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. They definitely happen. So as I said, during those 8 days, there is like every evening people get together to do pratikraman, what I was saying, asking for forgiveness for all the sins. That definitely happens during those 8 days, every single day, right? However, I think there are also services, or community gets together during birth, celebrating the birth ceremonies of birth or liberation ceremonies of our gods, for example, on the days that they were supposed to have achieved liberation or supposed to have been born, etc. There are many such, and
there are services that happen every day. There are 2 services that happen every day.
There you go. What 2 services are they? Oh, yes. So there is also a service called Arti and Puja, where the statues of gods, they are venerated by not just people, but we also have someone who specifically comes in and does this every single day to And in the evening, I think there is aartis happening in the evening, and in the morning there are pujas that are happening. And these are again different ways of venerating the god. Um,
Are there more questions in there? Or
Um,
did you get them all?
yeah, I think yeah, there's a saying they couldn't hear the comments off screen, but you just said them, so.
okay, yes,
About
I hope.
about the services.
Yep.
An image that some of us have seen of monks
Mhm.
is of having a broom in front of them. Is
Yeah.
that actually something that commonly happens, or is that something we just see on social media that may not be?
No, it's actually a real thing. It commonly happens. And again, this for them, as I said, right, you're trying to honor and not hurt all forms of life as much as you can, right? And the broom is actually very important in helping the monks, especially let's say where they are walking. Sometimes they can, use the broom to make sure that no walking living beings are there, right? Like ants or mosquitoes, for example. While they have to sit at a certain spot, they can use that to just wipe that small part out off, right? To make sure again that you are not hurting any beings. So again, all these are leading to that same concept.
And what would
It is
happen-
real though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last question, if I could.
Mhm.
How does it get handled then if there is required violence to save a life, such as maybe there's a parasite or there's
Yeah.
A choice that has to be made for one living being
Yeah.
to survive because the other is.
And that, even I would say, my understanding is probably not there to give a very objective answer from a Jainism perspective. The way I see it is, for survival. Let's just take a simple example. I don't want to take a example where we are choosing between two. For survival, right? As I said, why do we follow vegetarianism? It's not just that, okay, I mean, you with eating non-vegetarian food, you're hurting animals. Eating vegetarian food, you're still hurting plants. And that's still, I mean, I am saying that's objective answer, right? However, there are two facts here. One is you need food to survive. That is the nature's mechanism, right? Two is, if you need food to survive, what Jainism is telling us is, what is the least harmful way to survive in that sense? And the least harmful way in this case is by consuming vegetables or, vegetarian food, which comes from beings that are of the first sense, right? Rather than hurting beings that are of the higher senses, fourth, fifth senses, which would end up lead to higher or binding of higher karma to you. And so that's one way of looking at that, especially when it comes to making choices in life in terms of what to eat and all that. I think your question about, saving one versus the other, I mean, it could be a very situational thing that I don't want to speculate on right now.
Is it time? Oh, I was just going to ask one little question.
Mhm.
I know it's late. Hold on.
Yeah.
So my daughter, when I mentioned that Jains were vegetarian, she said,
Mhm.
well, what about vegan then?
Very good question. Vegan is even takes it to the extreme, right? And a lot of Jains, and again, let me explain you the concept of Indian vegetarianism versus veganism. Indian vegetarianism is where you consume milk and milk products, but not eggs. And then you eat vegetarian food, but that vegetarian food includes root vegetables. Now, Jain food, let me explain what Jain food is. Jain food is you're vegetarian, and a lot of vegetarians, they do consume milk products, but they're not consuming the root vegetables. So that is broadly categorized in the Jain food. But there are many people, and again, it's a matter of perspective and timing, right? Back in the day, it said that you get milk from cows, but they were not hurt back many hundreds of years ago, right? They were actually venerated as gods. In India, many people do that still, right? So you're not hurting them to get the milk. But nowadays, it's said, that you get milk, but these animals are eventually sent to slaughterhouses. They are kept in very bad conditions, etc. So in that case, consuming milk is not good, because what you're doing is actually leading to more hurt to these animals. So in today's day and age, becoming vegan may be more important, because again, it's leading to less harm to life, right? And so I know many friends, some friends who have become Jain and vegan, meaning they don't consume dairy, they don't even consume root vegetables. So many people, and that I really admire that people, what they do. Yeah.
Well, thank you. This was so wonderful, so
Thanks.
informative, and wow, I learned a ton. So thank you all for joining us online and here. And next month, we will have Linda Lang from the Quaker tradition. So, but thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Rahul Sheth.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. Thanks very much.